On the morning of June 30th, 1940, at precisely 11 o'clock hours, a lone Spitfire painted in an absurd shade of pale pink roared across the English Channel at 30,000 feet. Its target, the newly occupied German naval base at Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwyrndrobwllllantysiliogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogogo pilot, Pilot Officer George Patterson Christie of the Photographic Development Unit, should have been dead within minutes. A single fighter, unarmed, painted in what looked like a child's nursery colour, flying deep into Nazi-occupied France in broad daylight. Standard military thinking said this was suicide. Pink aircraft should stand out like a beacon. Pink was visible. Pink was vulnerable. Pink was wrong. Except it wasn't. Christie completed his reconnaissance run, photographed the entire base installation, and returned to England without a single German fighter spotting him. Not because he was lucky, because he was invisible. That absurd pink paint, officially designated Camouflage Pink and later refined to PRU Pink, had transformed his Spitfire into a ghost. At dawn and dusk, against the glow of atmospheric haze and low cloud base, that pale pink finish didn't just camouflage the aircraft, it made it vanish. The very characteristic that seemed guaranteed to get pilots killed was precisely what kept them alive. The Germans were hunting for blue-grey fighters against blue-grey sky. They never thought to look for pink. This wasn't paint applied randomly or optimistically. This was optical physics weaponized by an eccentric Australian entrepreneur named Sidney, refined through brutal trial and desperate innovation, and proven in the blood of reconnaissance pilots who flew what they grimly called dicing missions, as in dicing with death. And the principle that made it work would challenge everything air forces thought they knew about camouflage. When war broke out on September 3rd, 1939, the RAF's photographic reconnaissance capabilities were catastrophically inadequate. The standard approach used Bristol Blenheim bombers, slow, vulnerable, and equipped with defensive guns that proclaimed their military purpose to every German fighter within visual range. In the first 4 months of the war, RAF reconnaissance aircraft photographed 2,500 square miles of occupied Europe. The cost? Approximately 40 aircraft lost, most of them Blenheims. That's roughly 1 aircraft lost for every 63 square miles photographed. At that rate, mapping Hitler's Fortress Europe would cost thousands of aircraft and their crews. Enter Sidney, the Australian aviation pioneer who'd already been conducting clandestine photo reconnaissance flights over Germany, using a civilian-registered Lockheed 12A Electra. Cotton had proven a radical theory: speed and altitude could replace armour and guns. An unarmed aircraft flying at 30,000 feet and exceeding 390 miles per hour could simply outrun interception. The key was making the aircraft invisible enough to avoid detection until it was already past the threat. On October 16th, 1939, Cotton convinced Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding to release 2 precious Spitfire Mark-Is from Fighter Command. These fighters were stripped of everything that didn't contribute to speed or range. All 8.303 Browning machine guns removed, ammunition boxes deleted, armour plating discarded, radio sets pulled out to save weight. Gun ports were filled flush with plaster of Paris and polished smooth. Extra fuel tanks were installed behind the pilot and beneath the wings. F-24 cameras with 8-inch focal length lenses replaced the inner wing guns. The result was a reconnaissance platform that could reach 390 miles per hour at altitude, fast enough to outrun the Messerschmitt Bf-109E, which topped out around 354 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. But speed alone wasn't enough. The aircraft still had to avoid being spotted in the first place. Cotton's first photo reconnaissance Spitfires were painted in what he called camouflage green, a pale, light green shade intended for high-altitude work. On November 18th, 1939, Flight Lieutenant Maurice Shorty Longbottom took Spitfire NE 3071 on the first ever RAF Spitfire reconnaissance sortie, flying from Lille-Seclin in France to photograph Aviation, Germany, from 33,000 feet. The mission succeeded, but it revealed a fundamental problem. Different altitudes and lighting conditions required different camouflage approaches. At high altitude, above 25,000 feet, aircraft appeared as dark silhouettes against bright sky when viewed from below, or as dark specks against clouds when viewed from above. At medium and low altitude, between 5,000 and 15,000 feet, atmospheric haze became the dominant visual factor. And at dawn and dusk, when the sun sat low on the horizon, the entire sky took on a peculiar pinkish glow from UV light reflecting off clouds and moisture in the atmosphere. This is where physics becomes counterintuitive. The human eye doesn't see objects directly, it sees reflected light. An aircraft's visibility depends not on its real colour, but on how much contrast it creates against its background. Dark green or grey-blue camouflage works well against clear daytime sky, but against the rosy atmospheric haze of dawn or dusk, or against low cloud cover illuminated by the rising or setting sun, those sensible colours create stark contrast. They appear as dark spots against a lighter background. Pink, however, matches the wavelength of light scattered by atmospheric particles during low sun conditions. The colour wasn't chosen arbitrarily, it was mixed to match the specific hue of diffuse sunlight at dawn and dusk. The formula recorded in a RAF archive specified 1 part red, using standard RAF roundel red, to 10 parts white. The result was described by those who mixed it as a very pale pink-white, so subtle that it appeared almost white until placed directly against a white card. This wasn't Mountbatten pink, the brighter shade used by the Royal Navy on destroyers and landing craft. PRU pink was far paler, chosen specifically for the conditions reconnaissance Spitfires encountered, flying at medium altitude, typically 5,000 to 15,000 feet, beneath or against cloud cover, during the hours when German defences had trouble tracking aircraft visually. The Photographic Development Unit redesignated number. One Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, 1 PRU, on November 14, 1940, established a detachment at Naval in Cornwall, specifically to photograph German naval installations at Brest. These missions earned the designation dicing, short for dicing with death, because they required pilots to fly low and slow over heavily defended targets while maintaining precise courses for camera operation. Flight Lieutenant Keith Arnold, commanding the flight, watched pilot after pilot fail to return from Brest. In a particularly sobering incident, Arnold requested reserve pilots from RAF Benson. 2 arrived, took off for Brest that evening, and neither came back. The losses mounted, 5 pilots gone in quick succession, photographing the German battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and the dock facilities the Kriegsmarine was rapidly fortifying. The pink Spitfires represented a calculated gamble. They sacrificed high-altitude invisibility, where they appeared noticeably lighter than PRU blue aircraft, for medium and low-altitude protection. Pilots flew these missions during the golden hours when the sun hung low, casting that characteristic pinkish glow across the sky. The aircraft became part of the atmospheric haze rather than contrasting against it. Consider the account preserved in reconnaissance records. When coming out of the clouds at 3,300 feet, he encountered a pair of Bef 10-9s, which passed some 50 yards away from him. Fortunately, the Germans failed to notice him. 50 yards. That's roughly the length of a cricket pitch. The Messerschmitts flew close enough that the pilots should have easily identified the Spitfire's distinctive elliptical wings, but against the cloud-filtered dawn light, the pink paint rendered the reconnaissance aircraft effectively invisible. The colour's effectiveness extended beyond just matching atmospheric haze. Pale colours, white, very light pink, very pale blue, have a secondary optical effect. They reduce the apparent size of an object in hazy conditions. This principle, well understood by optical physicists, works because pale colours scatter light similarly to atmospheric particles. The aircraft's edges blur into the surrounding haze, making size and distance difficult to judge. This same principle led RAF Coastal Command and the US Navy to adopt white undersurfaces for anti-submarine aircraft, reducing the distance at which U-boat crews could spot approaching threats. Standard military camouflage theory of 1940 emphasized matching terrain when viewed from above, for bombers, or matching sky when viewed from below, for fighters. Reconnaissance aircraft broke this model. They needed to be invisible from all angles, at variable altitudes, across changing light conditions. No single colour could do everything. Instead, specialised schemes were developed for specific operational profiles. PRU blue, a darker, more saturated blue, was sanctioned for high-altitude work in October 1944, though it had been in use from 1941 onward. At 30,000 feet and above, PRU blue aircraft blended into the deep blue of high-altitude sky. PRU Pink, conversely, was optimized for low-altitude missions, below 15,000 feet, particularly when cloud base was low and sun angle was low. In North Africa and the Far East, where atmospheric conditions differed dramatically from European maritime climate, reconnaissance Spitfires used overall royal blue instead. The pilots themselves often hated the pink paint. It violated their instincts. One pilot recalled thinking they stuck out like a sore thumb when taxiing or parked on the airfield. The aircraft looked absurd, unmilitary, even embarrassing. But combat results proved the scheme's value. While exact loss rates for pink versus blue Spitfires aren't separately documented, the PRU as a whole suffered some of the highest loss ratios of any RAF unit, while simultaneously achieving extraordinary results. From November 1939 through the spring of 1940, Cotton's small fleet of modified Spitfires, never more than a handful operational at any time, photographed 5,000 square miles without losing a single aircraft. That perfect record didn't last, of course. On April 10, 1941, Pilot Officer William Kenneth Manifold took off from Saint-Ival at 17:30 hours in Spitfire, P9396, for a reconnaissance mission to Brest. He was intercepted and shot down by Lieutenant Horst Eulenberg of 2/JG26 at 19:25 hours, coming down in the English Channel north of Ploescat. Neither his body nor aircraft wreckage was recovered. It was Eulenberg's second PRU Spitfire kill that day. But for every pilot lost, dozens completed missions that would have been impossible in standard camouflage. The key was matching the operational profile to the paint scheme. Pink Spitfires didn't fly at high noon on clear days. That wasn't their mission. They flew at dawn, at dusk, in marginal weather with low cloud, when the atmospheric conditions transformed that pale pink into perfect camouflage. What made the pink Spitfire work wasn't the colour alone. It was the entire operational system built around understanding when and how the colour provided protection. This required three elements working together: the right colour, the right altitude, and the right time of day. First, the colour itself had to match atmospheric light conditions, not terrain or clear sky. Cotton and his team understood that cameras see differently than human eyes, and that atmospheric haze at low altitude during low sun angle creates specific light wavelengths. The 1:10 ratio of red to white wasn't arbitrary. It matched the observed colour of UV light reflection off clouds and moisture. Second, altitude had to be precisely managed. Too high, and the pink Spitfire became too light against darker sky. Too low, an atmospheric haze couldn't provide concealment. The sweet spot was 5,000 to 15,000 feet, altitudes where most German anti-aircraft fire was less accurate, and where fighter interceptions required more time to orchestrate. Third, timing was critical. Dawn missions launched when the sun was 10 to 15 degrees above the horizon, creating maximum atmospheric scattering. Dusk missions timed return flights for similar conditions. Cloud cover was preferred, not solid overcast, which would obscure targets, but broken cloud at 3,000 to 10,000 feet that provided both concealment and UV reflection. The Spitfire platform itself contributed to the system's success. The Merlin engine's two-stage supercharger allowed rapid altitude changes, climbed to 30,000 feet to cross the channel undetected, dive to medium altitude over the target for photography, climb back to safety for the return flight. The aircraft's speed meant German fighters had limited time to intercept, even if they spotted the intruder. The polished skin reduced drag and, more importantly, prevented ice crystal formation that could make the aircraft glitter in sunlight. Compare this to German reconnaissance doctrine. The Luftwaffe used fast bombers like the Junkers Ju 86P and Ju 88, which relied on altitude alone for protection. These aircraft flew at 40,000 feet and above, where atmospheric density made interception difficult. But they were large, relatively slow, and created significant visual signatures. British fighters eventually developed high-altitude variants, like the Spitfire HF7 with extended wingtips, specifically to counter these threats. On August 28, 1942, a single Ju 86R bombing Bristol from 42,000 feet killed 48 people. RAF high-altitude Spitfires subsequently intercepted and shot down several Ju 86Rs at extreme altitude, ending the German high-altitude bombing campaign. The PRU approach was more sophisticated. use multiple altitudes, multiple camouflage schemes, and precise timing to make detection nearly impossible. High-altitude work used PRU blue, low-altitude work used PRU pink. The aircraft themselves were modified for specific roles, some optimized for range. The PR Mark IV Bowser, with 114 gallons of internal fuel. Others for low-level oblique photography, the PR Mark V with side-mounted cameras, and others for medium-altitude work where pink camouflage provided optimal concealment. Creating an effective reconnaissance Spitfire required removing approximately 450 pounds of military equipment and adding back 200 pounds of cameras and fuel. The weight savings translated directly to performance gains. A standard Spitfire MK fighter carried 8.303 Browning machine guns, approximately 140 pounds total, 2,400 rounds of ammunition, approximately 190 pounds, armour plating behind the pilot, approximately 73 pounds, and full radio equipment, approximately 50 pounds. Removing all of it freed 453 pounds. That weight savings increased maximum speed by approximately 18 miles per hour and, more critically, extended range by roughly 50%. The PR Type B, introduced in February 1940, carried an additional 29-gallon fuel tank behind the pilot, raising total fuel capacity to approximately 114 gallons. At economical cruise speed of 210 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, this gave the aircraft an endurance of roughly 3.5 hours and a range of approximately 735 miles. The PR Mark IV, which entered service in October 1940, pushed range even further by utilising fuel tanks built into the wing's leading edges. Total fuel capacity reached 229 gallons, enough for 7-hour missions covering 2,000 miles. On one of the PR Mk4's first sorties, a reconnaissance Spitfire reached Stettin on the Baltic coast and returned to England, a round trip exceeding 1,400 miles. The cameras themselves were precision instruments requiring careful management. The f/24 camera with an 8-inch focal length lens could capture images from 30,000 feet, showing details as small as 3 feet across. The f/52 with a 36-inch focal length lens, basically a telephoto lens the size of a small telescope, could resolve details under 2 feet from high altitude. But these cameras faced two critical problems: fogging at high altitude due to temperature differentials and vibration from the aircraft's structure. Cotton solved the fogging problem by routing warm air from the engine's cooling system through ducting that blew across the camera lenses, preventing condensation. This innovation, developed during his pre-war clandestine flights over Germany and the Lockheed Electra, became standard on all PRU aircraft. The vibration problem required mounting cameras on rubber shock absorbers and ensuring the pilot maintained absolutely steady flight during camera runs. Even a small deviation from straight and level flight could mean missing a target entirely. The pilot's job during reconnaissance missions was extraordinarily demanding. Flying solo, without radio communication, early PRU Spitfires had radios removed to save weight, for up to 7 hours in a cramped, unheated cockpit, the reconnaissance pilot had to navigate by dead reckoning, maintain precise altitudes and courses, operate cameras, watch for enemy fighters in the rearview mirror, monitor for contrails that would betray position, and manage fuel carefully enough to make it home. Navigation errors could be fatal. Several PRU pilots simply vanished over the North Sea or Channel, presumably lost after missing their return navigation points. The pink paint itself required specific handling. It was applied in multiple thin coats over a polished aluminum surface, then buffed to a semi-gloss finish that minimized drag while maintaining the correct optical properties. The paint dried to a matte finish naturally, so achieving semi-gloss required careful polishing with fine abrasive. Too glossy, and the aircraft would glint in sunlight. Too matte, and it would appear darker than optimal. Maintenance crews developed techniques for touching up paint damage without disrupting the overall colour consistency. Interestingly, the exact shade of PRU pink varied slightly over time. The initial batches, mixed according to Cotton's formula, produced what observers described as almost white with a pinkish tinge. Later production batches, when PRU pink became more standardized, produced a slightly more saturated pink. Neither matched the bright Barbie pink that some modern model kits and restored aircraft display. Contemporary photographs of pink Spitfires, when analysed carefully, accounting for the orthochromatic and panchromatic film stocks used in the 1940s, consistently show a very pale colour, Noticeably lighter than aluminum but clearly not pure white, the intelligence gathered by Pink Spitfires directly influenced major military operations. On May 1940, a PRU Spitfire photographed approximately 400 German tanks concealed under camouflage netting and trees in the Ardennes forest, revealing the concentration point for the Wehrmacht's breakthrough that would bypass the Maginot Line and split Allied forces. The photographs showed tank formations, supply depots, and fuel stocks that confirmed German intentions to attack through terrain military theorists considered impenetrable for armoured formations. On February 22, 1941, Flying Officer William Kenneth Manifold flew a dicing mission specifically requested by Dr. R.V. Jones, the British Scientific Intelligence Officer. The target was a German radar installation, specifically a Freya early warning radar near the French coast. Manifold's photographs provided the first clear images showing the radar's characteristic dish antenna and support equipment. These images allowed British scientists to understand German radar capabilities and develop countermeasures. After completing his photographic run, Manifold, in violation of PRU doctrine but demonstrating the aggressive spirit of reconnaissance pilots, strafed the radar station, damaging it enough to render it temporarily inoperative. The most critical reconnaissance work focused on German naval facilities at Brest, where the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau posed a massive threat to Atlantic convoys. Pink Spitfires flew repeated dicing missions over Brest, photographing the ship's positions, defensive arrangements, and battle damage from RAF bombing raids. These oblique photographs, taken from low altitude with side-mounted cameras, showed details impossible to capture from high altitude: dock configurations, anti-aircraft gun positions, camouflage netting patterns, and whether the ships were actually combat-ready or undergoing repairs. In December 1943, photographs taken by PRU aircraft allowed Constance Babington-Smith, a British photo interpreter, to identify a V-1 flying bomb on the test stand at Peenemünde, Germany. The discovery confirmed intelligence reports about German secret weapons and triggered Operation Crossbow, a massive Allied bombing campaign targeting V-weapon production and launch facilities. Without those photographs, the V-1 campaign against Britain might have achieved complete surprise. The Muna Dam, target of the famous Dambuster raid in May 1943, was extensively photographed by PRU Spitfires before and after the attack. The pre-raid photographs showed water levels, dam structure, and defensive positions. The post-raid photographs proved the raid's success, showing water pouring through breached dam walls and flooding downstream. These images were used immediately for bomb damage assessment and subsequently for historical documentation of what remains one of the most audacious raids of the war. Throughout the war, PRU Spitfires flew approximately 16,000 operational sorties, providing an estimated 80% of all Allied intelligence gathered in Europe. The unit suffered loss rates among the highest of any RAF organisation, testament to the extreme danger of flying alone, unarmed, deep into enemy territory. Yet the intelligence gathered proved invaluable. As one RAF officer put it, "We sent the bombers where the PRU told us to. Without reconnaissance, we'd have been bombing blind. The PRU's combat record reveals the ruthless mathematics of aerial reconnaissance. From November 1940 to October 1942, when one PRU was disbanded and reorganised into 5 separate squadrons, Northam 540, 541, 542, 543 and 544, the unit lost approximately 50 aircraft and pilots on operations. That's roughly 1 loss per 320 sorties, a casualty rate of 0.31% per sortie. Compare this to Bomber Command's overall loss rate of approximately 3.8% per sortie during the same period. Reconnaissance pilots flew far fewer missions than bomber crews, but each mission penetrated deep into enemy territory without the protection of formation flying or defensive armament. The dicing missions, low-altitude reconnaissance flights over heavily defended targets, carried particularly high risk. These missions required pilots to fly predictable, steady courses at altitudes where anti-aircraft fire was most accurate and fighter interception easiest to coordinate. The pink camouflage provided concealment, but not protection. If spotted, the unarmed reconnaissance Spitfire had only speed and manoeuvrability for defence. Several factors contributed to the PRU survivability despite these challenges. First, reconnaissance pilots were selected from the most experienced fighter pilots, then given extensive additional training in navigation, camera operation, and tactics for avoiding detection and escape. Second, missions were planned meticulously, using the latest intelligence about German fighter dispositions, radar coverage, and anti-aircraft defences. Third, aircraft were maintained to higher standards than typical fighter squadrons. Engine reliability was critical when flying 7-hour missions over enemy territory. The specialised camouflage schemes worked. While exact figures comparing pink versus blue aircraft losses don't exist in surviving records, anecdotal evidence from pilots' memoirs and after-action reports consistently describe pink aircraft completing missions during dawn and dusk hours with fewer interception attempts than aircraft in other camouflage schemes during similar time periods. The optical physics worked as designed. When used in the correct environmental conditions, pink made the aircraft extraordinarily difficult to detect. One metric stands out particularly. During the period when Cotton's small flight of modified Spitfires operated from France, November 1939 to May 1940, covering approximately 5,000 square miles of enemy territory, not a single aircraft was lost to enemy action. The flight evacuated ahead of German advances during the fall of France, with one aircraft damaged in an air raid at Heston Aerodrome in September 1940, but operational losses during active reconnaissance missions was zero. This perfect record derived from Cotton's understanding that camouflage, speed, altitude, and timing formed an integrated system, not individual features. The pink Spitfire succeeded because it rejected orthodox military thinking about camouflage in favour of optical physics. Standard camouflage theory assumed aircraft needed to match terrain, when viewed from above, or sky, when viewed from below. This thinking optimised camouflage for specific viewing angles under specific conditions. The PRU approach recognised that reconnaissance aircraft operated under variable conditions, multiple altitudes, different times of day, changing weather, and viewing angles from multiple directions. No single camouflage pattern could optimise for all conditions. Instead, multiple specialised schemes were developed, each optimised for specific operational profiles. High-altitude work got PRU blue, low-altitude work in European maritime climate got PRU pink, low-altitude work in North African desert got royal blue. Each scheme matched its operational environment. This approach required understanding that human vision and the mechanical vision of cameras depends on contrast, not absolute colour. An object becomes visible when it contrasts with its background. The pink paint didn't hide the Spitfire by making it blend with terrain or sky directly. It hid the Spitfire by matching the scattered light wavelengths present in atmospheric haze during low sun conditions. The aircraft disappeared not by looking like something else, but by looking like nothing, like empty atmosphere. The Royal Navy reached similar conclusions independently, painting destroyers and landing craft in Mountbatten pink, a brighter, more saturated pink, than PRU pink for Mediterranean operations. The Long-Range Desert Group used pink-painted trucks and Land Rovers in North Africa. In each case, the logic was identical. Pale pink matches the scattered light present in desert haze and early morning or evening atmospheric conditions better than any other colour. Modern militaries still apply these principles. During the 1991 Gulf War, RAF Jaguar, Buccaneer, and Tornado GR, one aircraft were painted in a pink-tinted desert camouflage scheme that echoed the PRU approach. The colour helped aircraft blend with desert heat haze and dust clouds kicked up by operations. Fighter pilots reported difficulty spotting friendly aircraft painted in the pink-tinted scheme even at relatively close range during low-altitude operations. The fundamental lesson: effective camouflage requires understanding the specific conditions under which the object will be observed. No camouflage works everywhere. The pink Spitfire worked brilliantly in its operational niche, medium altitude, dawn, dust timing, maritime atmospheric conditions, and would have been disastrously visible in other conditions. The genius wasn't the colour itself. The genius was matching the colour precisely to the mission profile.